Hey guys, tonight we begin with a topic a little less sanitized and a lot more revealing. Medieval hygiene. Yes, even in a world without soap dispensers, hot showers, or antibacterial anything, people still found ways to stay clean. And let me tell you, some of it was ingenious, some of it was horrifying, all of it was deeply medieval. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe light a candle for that authentic medieval atmosphere. And let's step back in time to discover what it really meant to freshen up in the Middle Ages. The daily scrub down. In a world where soap was a luxury and hot water was a logistical nightmare, the daily wash was less of a ritual and more of a strategic battle against grime. Think of it as medieval damage control, but with cold water and questionable towels. Most people started their day with what was called a dry wash, essentially wiping themselves down with a rough linen cloth, sometimes dampened with whatever water was available. This wasn't the refreshing splash we imagine. This was more like aggressively dusting yourself off. But the dust was yesterday's sweat and the general accumulation of medieval life. The wealthy might have had servants heat water in large copper basins, but for most people, water came from the well, the river, or if you were unlucky, the same place the animals drank. Cold water was the norm, which meant winter washing was a teeth-chattering, hurried affair that left you questioning whether being dirty might actually be warmer. Soap, when it existed, was harsh and expensive. Made from animal fat and wood ash, it could strip paint off a wall and probably did similar things to skin. Most people made do with sand, rough stones, or coarse cloths that worked like medieval loofahs, minus any gentleness. The idea was to scrub off whatever would come off and hope the rest would eventually sort itself out. People understood cleanliness was connected to health, even if they didn't understand why. They just knew that the cleanest person in the village usually wasn't the one dying of mysterious pustules. So the daily scrub, however basic, was taken seriously. It was maintenance like oiling a cart wheel or sharpening a blade. Necessary, practical, and done with minimal fanfare. The tools were simple. A basin if you were lucky, a cloth, and whatever passed for soap in your particular corner of the world. Sometimes that meant lye soap that could double as paint remover. Sometimes it meant rubbing yourself down with herbs that smelled better than they cleaned. Either way, you emerged from the experience technically cleaner, though possibly raw and definitely cold. Teeth, the original dental plan. Medieval dental hygiene was a fascinating mix of surprisingly effective techniques and absolutely terrifying misconceptions. In a world where sugar was rare but honey was common, and where the local barber doubled as a dentist, keeping your teeth was both simpler and more complicated than you might expect. The primary tool for dental care was the tooth cloth, a rough piece of linen rubbed with salt, herbs, or powdered charcoal. You'd wrap this around your finger and scrub your teeth like you were polishing armor. The salt acted as an abrasive, removing plaque and food particles, while herbs like mint or rosemary provided flavor and supposed medicinal benefits. Charcoal, believe it or not, actually worked to whiten teeth, though it turned your mouth black in the process. Some people use twigs from specific trees, willow, oak, or hazelnut, chewed into a brush-like consistency. These natural toothbrushes contained compounds that genuinely helped clean teeth and freshen breath. It wasn't glamorous, but it was surprisingly effective. Think of it as the medieval version of those bamboo toothbrushes, except you had to prepare your own from scratch. Toothpaste was a loose term for various powders and pastes made from ground herbs, salt, and sometimes honey. Recipes varied wildly. Some called for crushed bones, others for ground pearls if you were wealthy enough to waste pearls on dental care. Most settled for whatever combination of salt and herbs wouldn't immediately burn your gums off. Bad breath was addressed with chewing herbs, parsley, mint, cloves, or anise seeds. This wasn't just vanity, it was social survival. In a world where people lived in close quarters and bathing was infrequent, fresh breath was a courtesy everyone appreciated. Some recipes for breath fresheners included wine, which probably helped with the social anxiety of having medieval-level oral hygiene. When teeth went bad, which they often did, the solution was usually extraction. No anesthesia, no gentle coaxing, just a pair of iron tongs, a strong grip, and the hope that you'd pass out quickly. Some barber surgeons specialized in tooth pulling and traveled from town to town, advertising their services with necklaces of extracted teeth. It was both marketing and a grotesque trophy collection. Prevention was better understood than you might expect. People knew that certain foods caused problems and that cleaning teeth regularly helped. They just didn't know why, which led to some interesting folk remedies. Rinsing with urine was believed to whiten teeth, which sounds horrific but actually contains ammonia, a legitimate cleaning agent. Not recommended, but not entirely crazy either. The weekly bath ritual. Contrary to popular belief, medieval people did bathe. They just did it differently, less frequently, and with a lot more planning than we're used to. The weekly bath wasn't a quick shower. It was an event, a production that required preparation, resources, and usually help from others. The process began with heating water, which was no small task. Large cauldrons had to be filled, fires built, and wood gathered. For most families, this was a once-weekly investment of time and fuel. The water was heated over an open fire and carried in buckets to a wooden tub, if you owned one, or a large basin if you didn't. The whole process could take hours just to prepare. Bathtubs were shallow wooden affairs, often lined with cloth to prevent splinters in sensitive places. You didn't lie down and soak, you sat, knees up, while family members poured warm water over you. Privacy was a luxury most people couldn't afford. Bathing was often a family activity, with multiple people using the same water in order of social importance. Father first, then mother, then children in descending age order. Soap, when available, was harsh but effective. Made from animal fat and lye, it could clean thoroughly but left skin dry and sometimes irritated. Many people preferred to bathe with herbs, lavender, rosemary, or chamomile steeped in the water like a giant tea bath. These herbs provided pleasant scents and were believed to have medicinal properties. The wealthy turned bathing into social events. Public bathhouses existed in larger towns, often attached to inns or run by religious orders. These weren't the relaxing spa experiences we imagine. They were communal, practical, and often doubled as places of business. People conducted meetings, arranged marriages, and gossiped while soaking in large wooden tubs. Winter bathing was particularly challenging. Cold air, minimal heating, and wet skin made for a miserable experience. Many people simply reduced their bathing frequency in winter, relying more heavily on dry cleaning methods and warmer clothing to manage hygiene. The church had complex relationships with bathing. Some religious orders promoted cleanliness as godliness, while others viewed excessive attention to the body as vanity. This created interesting tensions where being too clean could be seen as sinful, but being dirty was also considered unhealthy. Most people found a middle ground somewhere between spiritual purity and practical necessity. After bathing, people often rubbed themselves with oils or herbs to moisturize skin that had been stripped by harsh soap and hard water. Rose oil, if available, was prized for its scent and supposed healing properties. More commonly, people used animal fats or plant oils that were available locally. Hair, the crown of medieval problems. Medieval hair care was a constant battle against grease, vermin, and social expectations. In a world where hats were common but shampoo didn't exist, maintaining presentable hair required creativity, patience, and a high tolerance for discomfort. The basic hair washing routine involved harsh soap, cold water, and a lot of scrubbing. Hair was washed infrequently, perhaps once every few weeks, because the process was time-consuming and soap was expensive. Between washings, people relied on brushing, braiding, and covering their hair to maintain some semblance of cleanliness. Combs were essential tools, carved from wood, bone, or horn. But they weren't just for styling, they were weapons in the war against lice. Everyone had lice. Rich, poor, noble, peasant lice were the great equalizer of medieval life. Combing was a daily ritual of checking for and removing these unwanted residents. Families would spend evenings picking through each other's hair, a social bonding activity that was both practical and intimate. Lice treatments ranged from the practical to the desperate. Mercury was sometimes applied to the scalp, which worked to kill lice but also slowly poisoned the user. More common were herbal treatments, pennyroyal, tansy, or wormwood steeped in oil and massaged into the hair. These actually worked reasonably well and smelled better than the alternative of just living with the infestation. Hair oils were crucial for maintaining hair health between washings. Olive oil, when available, was prized. More commonly, people used animal fats. Bear grease was particularly valued for its supposed ability to promote hair growth. These treatments left hair greasy but protected it from damage and helped control lice. Women's hair care was particularly complex due to social expectations about coverage and modesty. Married women typically covered their hair completely in public, which meant hair care was largely about maintenance rather than appearance. Unmarried women could display their hair, making cleanliness and styling more important for social and marriage prospects. Hair accessories served practical purposes. Ribbons and pins weren't just decorative. They held hair in place and helped manage unwashed locks. Hairnets, when available, protected hair from dirt and cooking smoke while keeping it contained during work. Balding was addressed with various remedies, most of which were completely ineffective but sold hope to desperate men. Ground deer antler, mixed with various oils, was a popular treatment. Bird droppings were sometimes applied to bald spots, based on the logic that if birds grew feathers, their waste might help humans grow hair. It didn't work, but it kept barbers and herbalists in business. Color treatments existed but were risky. Henna, when available, could provide red tints. More dangerous were lead-based treatments that could lighten hair but also cause lead poisoning. Most people accepted their natural hair color, though graying hair was sometimes treated with various plant dyes of questionable effectiveness. The art of medieval deodorant. In a world without antiperspirants, air conditioning, or the basic understanding that bacteria cause body odor, managing personal scent was both an art and a science. Medieval people understood that they smelled, and they developed surprisingly sophisticated methods to mask, reduce, or redirect their natural aromas. The foundation of scent management was clothing. Fresh linen undergarments were changed regularly, daily if you could afford it, weekly if you couldn't. These linen layers absorbed sweat and oils, creating a barrier between skin and outer clothing. The outer garments, which were expensive and difficult to clean, stayed relatively fresh longer. It was a practical system that worked better than you might expect. Herbs were the medieval perfume industry. People tucked sachets of dried herbs into their clothing, lavender, rose petals, mint, or whatever grew locally and smelled pleasant. These herb pouches were sewn into sleeve linings, bodice fronts, or carried in small bags attached to belts. The constant movement released fragrance throughout the day. Perfumed oils were luxuries, but homemade versions were common. Rose oil, made by steeping rose petals in animal fat or vegetable oil, was highly prized. Other flowers, jasmine, violet, lily, were similarly processed. These oils were applied to pulse points or rubbed into clothing. They didn't eliminate body odor, but they provided pleasant competing scents. Incense and fumigation were used to scent both bodies and spaces. People would stand over burning herbs or incense, allowing the smoke to penetrate their clothing. This practice, called fumigation, was believed to have health benefits as well as aromatic ones. Wealthy households had dedicated fumigation chambers where family members could expose themselves to medicinal and aromatic smoke. Spices served double duty as both flavorings and deodorants. Cloves were chewed for fresh breath and sewn into clothing for scent. Cinnamon bark was sometimes ground and dusted on the body. These spices were expensive, making them status symbols as well as practical hygiene tools. Flowers were incorporated into daily routines when available. Rose petals were rubbed on skin or steeped in washing water. Lavender was dried and stuffed into pillows and mattresses. Violets were made into waters for washing face and hands. These weren't just pleasant luxuries. They were necessary tools for managing life in a world where everyone smelled like their work. Religious practices influenced scent management. Some holy orders embraced cleanliness as godliness. developing sophisticated recipes for scented waters and oils. Others viewed pleasant scents as vanity, preferring the natural odors of honest work. This created interesting social dynamics where being too fragrant could be seen as sinful or pretentious. Seasonal variations affected scent strategies. Summer required more frequent linen changes and heavier use of herbs and oils. Winter allowed for less frequent washing but required different scents: warmer, spicier aromas that complemented heavier clothing and indoor living. The wealthy could afford imported perfumes, musk from far-off animals, ambergris from whales, exotic flowers and spices that cost fortunes. These were applied sparingly and served as markers of wealth and sophistication. For most people, local herbs and homemade preparations had to suffice, but creativity and knowledge of local plants often produced surprisingly effective results. Laundry, the weekly mountain. Medieval laundry was an epic undertaking that could consume entire days and required the coordination of multiple people, significant resources, and favorable weather. It wasn't something you did casually. It was a production that households planned for and dreaded in equal measure. The process began with soaking. Dirty linens and clothing were bundled into large baskets and carried to the nearest river, stream, or well. Everything was sorted by fabric and color, then soaked in cold water for hours or sometimes overnight. This loosened dirt and made the actual washing process more effective, but it also meant laundry was a multi-day commitment. Soap making often preceded laundry day. Households would prepare lye soap from wood ash and animal fat, a process that was both dangerous and skill-intensive. The wrong proportions could result in soap that either didn't clean or burned skin. Too much lye could destroy fabric. Getting it right required experience and careful attention to details that could vary based on the season, water quality, and available materials. The actual washing involved beating clothes against rocks or wooden paddles. This wasn't gentle agitation. This was aggressive pounding designed to drive dirt out of fabric fibers. Women developed strong arms and backs from hours of beating laundry, and clothes wore out quickly under this treatment. Delicate fabrics required special handling, which usually meant gentle rubbing rather than beating. Stains required special treatment. Blood was treated with cold water and salt. Grease was attacked with hot water and ash. Mud was allowed to dry completely, then brushed off before washing. Wine and food stains were rubbed with various combinations of herbs, ash, and oils. Most stains were permanent, which meant clothes accumulated a history of every meal and accident their wearer experienced. Drying was weather-dependent and space-intensive. Clothes were spread on bushes, hung from lines, or laid on grassy areas to dry in the sun. Rainy weather could extend laundry day for weeks, creating hygiene challenges as people ran out of clean undergarments. Winter drying was particularly problematic, often requiring indoor drying that filled homes with damp, steamy air. The wealthy could afford servants to handle laundry, but they also had more clothes to wash and higher standards for cleanliness. Their garments were often made from fabrics that required specialized care, silks that couldn't be beaten, furs that needed careful brushing, embroidered pieces that had to be hand-washed with extreme care. professional laundresses existed in larger towns, usually women who had access to good water sources and space for drying. They charged by the piece and often specialized in certain types of garments. Monastery laundries were known for their skill with fine fabrics and white linens, technologies they developed through years of maintaining religious vestments. Ironing involved heated stones or metal plates. Clothes were pressed while damp, using heavy stones heated by the fire and carefully applied to remove wrinkles. This was dangerous work. Burns were common, and the results were often inconsistent. Most people simply folded their clothes carefully while damp and hoped for the best. Seasonal laundry schedules developed based on weather patterns. Spring and fall were prime laundry seasons, when temperatures were moderate and water sources were reliable. Summer washing dried quickly but was physically brutal work in the heat. Winter laundry was avoided when possible, leading to extended periods of wearing the same garments. The privy problem. Medieval bathroom facilities ranged from sophisticated castle systems to holes in the ground, but all shared certain characteristics. They were cold, they smelled, and using them required both courage and careful timing. The medieval approach to human waste management was practical, inventive, and absolutely nothing like the comfortable privacy we take for granted. Castle garderobes were the height of medieval bathroom technology. These were small chambers built into castle walls, often with stone seats over shafts that dropped waste directly into moats or rivers below. The name garderobe came from the practice of storing clothes there, as the ammonia from urine was believed to repel insects. It was multipurpose design at its finest: bathroom, closet, and pest control all in one convenient, aromatic location. The seats themselves were carved stone or wood, often with surprisingly comfortable curves. Wealthy castle dwellers might have padded seats or even armrests. Multiple holes were common, making bathroom visits social occasions whether you wanted them to be or not. Privacy was a luxury most people couldn't afford, and bathroom activities were often communal by necessity. Toilet paper didn't exist, so people improvised with whatever was available. Wealthy individuals might use soft linen cloths that were washed and reused. Most people relied on hay, straw, leaves, or moss. Some areas developed specialized tools: curved sticks, smooth stones, or even shells in coastal regions. The wealthy sometimes used wool, which was soft but expensive enough that it had to be washed and reused. Monasteries often had the most sophisticated bathroom facilities, with running water systems that actually flushed waste away. These early sewage systems were engineering marvels, using gravity and water flow to carry waste to rivers or specially constructed pits. Some monasteries had heated bathrooms, making them more comfortable than most modern facilities in terms of temperature control. Urban areas faced particular challenges. Houses built over rivers could empty directly into flowing water, but inland cities had to develop waste removal systems. Night soilmen collected human waste from houses and transported it outside city walls, where it was sold to farmers as fertilizer. This was a legitimate profession with its own guild regulations and social hierarchy. Chamber pots were the indoor solution for those who could afford them. These ceramic or metal containers were kept under beds or in private corners and emptied regularly into larger waste systems. Wealthy households had servants whose job included emptying and cleaning chamber pots. The pots themselves were often decorated, as if beautiful designs could somehow make the function more pleasant. Public facilities existed in larger cities, usually simple structures with multiple seats over communal pits. These were cleaned irregularly and were breeding grounds for disease, but they provided necessary services for people who couldn't afford private facilities. Using them required a strong stomach and a willingness to socialize in the most intimate circumstances. Cleanliness after bathroom use was managed with water when available, cloths when it wasn't. Some areas had specific containers of water kept near toilets for cleaning purposes. Wealthy individuals might have servants who assisted with cleaning, making bathroom visits elaborate productions involving multiple people and specialized equipment. Menstruation was managed with reusable cloth rags that were washed and reused. These were often made from soft linen or wool and were carefully maintained as essential health items. Women developed complex systems for managing their cycles discreetly in societies where menstruation was often considered spiritually contaminating or socially embarrassing. Shaving sharp objects and steady nerves. Medieval shaving was a high-stakes activity that combined social necessity with genuine physical danger. In a world where razors were hand-forged, mirrors were luxury items, and steady hands were literally life-or-death requirements, removing facial hair was both an art and an extreme sport. Razors were crafted by blacksmiths and were essentially small, extremely sharp knives. The blade was folded into a handle for protection, but sharpening and maintenance required skill and proper tools. A dull razor was more dangerous than a sharp one, as it required more pressure and was likely to slip. Men who couldn't afford their own razor often shared with neighbors or visited professional barbers. The shaving process began with preparation. Hair was softened with warm water, if available, or with oils and ointments. Some men used animal fats. Bear grease was particularly prized for its ability to soften tough beard hair. Others relied on soap, though the harsh lye-based soaps of the time could irritate skin that was about to be scraped with sharp metal. Mirrors were rare and expensive, so most men shaved by feel or with help from family members. Professional barbers had polished metal mirrors, but these provided dim, distorted reflections that made precision difficult. Many men developed the ability to shave entirely by touch, running their fingers over their faces to check for missed spots. Barbers were the professionals of medieval grooming. They didn't just cut hair, they performed surgery, pulled teeth, and provided the closest, safest shaves available. A barber's shop was equipped with sharp razors, soap, hot water, and most importantly, experience. Visiting a barber was a social event where men gathered to discuss local news while waiting their turn. Shaving frequency varied by social class and occupation. Priests were expected to be clean-shaven as a mark of their devotion, making regular shaving a religious obligation. Nobles often shaved daily or every few days to maintain their appearance. Common laborers might shave weekly or even less frequently, depending on their access to tools and time. Cuts were inevitable and potentially serious. A deep cut in an era before antiseptics could lead to infection and death. Men carried special preparations for treating shaving injuries, mixtures of herbs, oils, and sometimes alcohol that were applied to wounds immediately. Some barbers specialized in treating shaving injuries and were skilled at stopping bleeding and preventing infection. Shaving accidents created interesting social dynamics. A man with visible shaving cuts was either very poor, couldn't afford professional barber services, very vain, attempted difficult shaving himself, or very unlucky, had a bad barber. The quality of a man's shave became a subtle indicator of his social status and personal judgment. Some men chose not to shave at all, growing full beards for religious, practical, or personal reasons. Beards required their own maintenance, regular combing, trimming, and cleaning. Beard oils and balms were used to keep facial hair soft and manageable. A well-maintained beard could be as much of a status symbol as a clean shave. Women occasionally removed facial hair, but this was done with different tools and techniques. Tweezers made from metal or wood were used to pluck individual hairs. Some women used early forms of depilatory creams made from harsh chemicals that could burn skin. Most simply accepted whatever facial hair they grew, as removing it was painful, dangerous, and not considered essential. Seasonal variations affected shaving practices. Winter beards were common among men who worked outdoors, as facial hair provided warmth and protection. Spring often brought mass shaving as men cleaned up their appearance after long, hairy winters. Summer shaving was more frequent, as beards were hot and uncomfortable in warm weather. Foot care, the foundation of medieval life. In a world where walking was the primary mode of transportation and proper footwear was a luxury, foot care was both essential for survival and a constant challenge. Medieval feet endured conditions that would horrify modern podiatrists, yet people developed surprisingly effective methods for maintaining their most important transportation system. Most people walked barefoot much of the time, developing thick, callous soles that could handle rough terrain, sharp stones, and extreme temperatures. These natural calluses were carefully maintained. Too thick and they cracked painfully. Too thin and every step was agony. People used rough stones to file down excessive callus buildup and oils to keep skin flexible. Shoes, when available, were simple leather affairs that offered basic protection but little comfort. They were expensive and had to last for years, so foot care often involved maintaining leather footwear as much as caring for feet themselves. Leather had to be kept supple with animal fats, holes had to be patched, and soles had to be reinforced or replaced when worn through. Washing feet was one of the most common hygiene practices, more frequent than full-body bathing. Cold water and rough cloths were used to remove dirt and debris. Some people added herbs to foot washing water, mint for cooling, lavender for scent, or salt for its antiseptic properties. Foot washing was often a social activity, with family members helping each other reach difficult spots. Foot injuries were common and potentially serious. Cuts from sharp stones could become infected without proper care. Splinters from wooden floors or outdoor debris had to be carefully removed. Blisters from ill-fitting shoes or long walks needed treatment to prevent infection. People developed extensive knowledge of herbal treatments for foot problems. Fungal infections were widespread in a world where feet were often wet, dirty, and enclosed in leather shoes that never completely dried. Various herbs and oils were used to treat these conditions. Garlic was rubbed on affected areas. Vinegar solutions were used as soaks, and certain plant extracts were applied as primitive antifungal treatments. Toenails required regular maintenance with whatever sharp tools were available. Knives, small scissors, or even rough stones were used to keep nails trimmed. Ingrown toenails were treated with hot soaks and careful cutting, though serious cases often led to infection and disability. Winter foot care was particularly challenging. Frostbite was a real danger for people who couldn't afford proper winter footwear. Feet were wrapped in cloth or animal fur, and warming techniques included rubbing with animal fats or soaking in warm water when available. Some people developed techniques for keeping their feet warm during long winter days outdoors. Foot odor was managed through various means. Fresh straw or herbs were stuffed into shoes to absorb moisture and provide pleasant scents. Feet were dusted with ground herbs or ash to reduce moisture. Some people changed the cloths wrapped around their feet multiple times per day during heavy work periods. Professional foot care existed in some areas, usually provided by the same people who offered other medical services. Monasteries often had monks who specialized in treating foot problems for pilgrims and local people. Some barbers also provided foot care services, including nail cutting and treatment of minor injuries. The wealthy could afford better shoes and more frequent foot care, but they also had different foot problems. Soft shoes and less walking led to tender feet that were easily injured. Some nobles had servants whose job included washing and caring for their master's feet, a service that was both practical and symbolic of social status. The social hierarchy of clean. Medieval hygiene wasn't just about staying clean, it was about displaying your place in society. The quality, frequency, and methods of your personal care sent clear signals about your wealth, social status, and moral character. In a world where appearances mattered enormously, hygiene became a complex language of class distinction. The wealthy displayed their status through expensive hygiene products and elaborate personal care routines. Imported soaps from distant lands, perfumed oils, silver mirrors, and fine linen undergarments were all markers of economic success. Wealthy women had access to cosmetics made from rare ingredients, lead-based face powders, imported rouge, and exotic perfumes that cost more than most people earned in a year. Professional hygiene services were luxury markers. Having servants to heat bath water, assist with washing, and maintain clothing was a clear sign of wealth. Professional barbers, bathhouse attendants, and laundresses were employed by those who could afford to outsource their personal care. The very wealthy had personal hygienist servants whose primary job was maintaining their employer's cleanliness and appearance. Different social classes developed distinct hygiene practices that reinforced their positions. Peasants might bathe in cold streams and use harsh lye soap, while nobles soaked in heated tubs with perfumed water. These differences weren't just practical. They were social statements that reinforced existing hierarchies and made it easy to identify someone's background at a glance. Religious attitudes toward hygiene varied by denomination and social position. Some religious orders promoted cleanliness as spiritual discipline, developing sophisticated personal care routines that included regular bathing, careful grooming, and attention to personal appearance. Others viewed excessive attention to physical appearance as vanity or worldly corruption, preferring simpler approaches to hygiene. Hygiene standards differed dramatically between urban and rural populations. City dwellers had access to professional services, imported products, and social pressure to maintain higher standards of cleanliness. Rural people developed practical approaches based on available resources and seasonal rhythms, often maintaining cleanliness through methods that city people would have considered primitive. Gender played a significant role in hygiene expectations. Women were expected to maintain higher standards of personal cleanliness, particularly regarding menstruation, hair care, and general appearance. Men's hygiene was often tied to their profession. Merchants and nobles needed to maintain good appearances, while laborers were expected to smell like their work. Age created additional hygiene hierarchies. Young people were expected to maintain better appearance as they sought marriage partners. Elderly people were often given more leeway in personal care standards, though wealthy elderly individuals were expected to maintain their status through continued attention to hygiene. Professional hygiene workers developed their own social hierarchies. Master barbers who served wealthy clients had higher status than those who worked with common people. Bathhouse managers were respected professionals, while the workers who actually cleaned facilities had lower social standing. Hygiene emergencies could temporarily disrupt social hierarchies. During plagues, famines, or wars, normal hygiene standards broke down and social distinctions based on cleanliness became less important than simple survival. These periods often led to temporary mixing of social classes in shared hygiene facilities. Regional variations created interesting social dynamics. Areas with access to good water sources, soap-making materials, or trade routes developed higher hygiene standards that became markers of regional identity. People from cleaner regions often looked down on those from areas with fewer hygiene resources. Seasonal rhythms of cleanliness. Medieval hygiene wasn't a constant routine. It ebbed and flowed with the seasons, responding to weather patterns, agricultural cycles, and the basic realities of life without modern conveniences. Understanding these seasonal rhythms helps explain how medieval people managed personal care throughout the year. Spring was the great cleaning season. After months of winter confinement, people emerged to address the accumulated grime of the cold season. This was when major laundry projects began, when people could finally bathe in rivers that weren't frozen, and when households undertook massive cleaning projects. Spring cleaning wasn't just about houses. It was about bodies and clothes that had been managed with minimal resources through the dark months. The spring cleaning ritual often began with a thorough bath, the first hot bath many people had enjoyed since the previous autumn. Herbs were gathered for the first time in months: fresh mint, new lavender shoots, and early flowers that could be used for washing and scenting. Lice treatments were applied as people addressed infestations that had built up over winter months of shared living spaces and infrequent bathing. Summer brought both opportunities and challenges. Longer days meant more time for hygiene activities, and warm weather made bathing less of an ordeal. Rivers and streams were at their most pleasant temperatures, making full-body washing possible for people who couldn't heat large quantities of water. However, summer also meant more sweating, more agricultural work, and higher risks of contamination from flies and other insects. Summer hygiene routines focused on frequent washing of hands, face, and feet, the parts most exposed to dirt and sun. Linen undergarments were changed more frequently, sometimes daily for those who could afford multiple sets. Herbal preparations became essential as people spent more time outdoors and needed protection from insects and sun exposure. Autumn was preparation season. People prepared their hygiene supplies for winter, making soaps, gathering and drying herbs, and preparing the materials they would need during months when fresh supplies weren't available. This was when households made their major purchases of imported hygiene items, before winter travel became impossible. Autumn also brought the final major bathing sessions before winter. People took advantage of still warm weather to complete thorough cleaning routines, knowing they might not have another chance for months. Hair was trimmed, nails were cut, and any necessary dental work was completed before the barber became inaccessible due to winter weather. Winter transformed hygiene into a survival challenge. Water sources froze, making washing difficult or impossible. Heating water required precious fuel that was needed for warmth and cooking. Indoor air became stale and smoke-filled, while outdoor activities were limited to essential tasks. People adapted by focusing on the most critical hygiene activities and developing winter-specific cleaning techniques. Winter hygiene relied heavily on dry cleaning methods. Clothes were brushed, aired, and treated with herbs rather than washed. Bodies were wiped down with cloths rather than bathed. Hair care focused on brushing and treating with oils rather than washing. These methods weren't ideal, but they allowed people to maintain basic cleanliness when full washing wasn't possible. The psychological aspects of seasonal hygiene were significant. Spring cleaning provided emotional as well as physical renewal, marking the end of winter's confinement and the beginning of a new year of possibilities. Summer hygiene rituals connected people with nature and abundance. Autumn preparations provided security for the challenging months ahead. Winter hygiene became a form of discipline and community bonding as families worked together to maintain cleanliness under difficult conditions. The economics of getting clean. Medieval hygiene was expensive. Every aspect of personal cleanliness, from the soap to the water heating fuel to the time required for proper care, represented significant economic investment. For most people, maintaining even basic cleanliness required careful resource management and strategic choices about where to spend limited funds. Soap was one of the most expensive hygiene items. Good quality soap required animal fats and potash or lye, materials that had other valuable uses. The time and skill required to make soap properly meant that many families purchased it from professional soap makers rather than making their own. A bar of quality soap might cost the equivalent of several days' wages for a laborer, making it a luxury item that was used sparingly. Water heating represented another major expense. Fuel for fires was expensive and took time to gather. Heating enough water for a full bath could require several hours of wood burning, representing fuel that could have been used for cooking or warmth. Many families chose to heat smaller quantities of water for washing specific body parts rather than full baths, making strategic decisions about which parts of the body needed cleaning most urgently. Professional hygiene services created a thriving economy around cleanliness. Barbers charged premium prices for their services, making regular professional grooming a luxury. Bathhouses operated as businesses, charging entrance fees and providing additional services like massage or hair care for extra costs. Laundresses developed pricing systems based on fabric type, soil level, and urgency of need. The hygiene economy also included specialized trades. Soap makers, perfume creators, comb carvers, and razor smiths all made livings from the demand for cleanliness. These craftspeople often enjoyed higher social status than other trades because their products were associated with wealth and refinement. A skilled soap maker could command prices that made hygiene products accessible only to the wealthy. Import costs made certain hygiene items incredibly expensive. Spices used for perfuming, high-quality oils, and specialized soaps from distant regions cost fortunes. These imported items became status symbols, with wealthy households displaying their prosperity through exotic scents and luxurious cleaning products. The spice trade was driven as much by hygiene demands as culinary ones. Labor costs were significant for wealthy households that maintained high hygiene standards. Servants dedicated to personal care, laundry specialists, and hygiene assistants represented major ongoing expenses. Some noble households employed people whose sole job was maintaining the cleanliness and appearance of family members, representing a significant portion of household budgets. Seasonal price fluctuations affected hygiene economics. Winter fuel costs made hot water bathing prohibitively expensive for many people. Spring brought lower prices as new supplies became available, but also higher demand as people addressed winter's accumulated hygiene challenges. These fluctuations meant that maintaining consistent cleanliness required economic planning and flexibility. Economic emergencies often forced families to choose between hygiene and other necessities. During famines, fuel might be reserved entirely for cooking. During wars, imported hygiene products became unavailable. These crises revealed how much of medieval cleanliness depended on economic stability and resource availability. Medieval beauty standards and hygiene. Medieval concepts of beauty were intimately connected to hygiene, but not always in ways that modern people would recognize as healthy or attractive. Beauty standards drove hygiene practices, while hygiene capabilities influenced what was considered beautiful. The result was a complex relationship between appearance, cleanliness, and social acceptability that varied dramatically across regions and social classes. Pale skin was highly prized, particularly among women, leading to hygiene practices designed to avoid sun exposure and maintain light complexions. Women used various preparations to keep their skin pale: lemon juice, vinegar washes, and even dangerous lead-based cosmetics. The connection between pale skin and cleanliness was strong, as working outdoors in dirty conditions typically resulted in tanned, weathered skin that marked lower social status. Hair color preferences influenced hygiene routines. Blonde hair was often considered most beautiful, leading to various lightening treatments that were both ineffective and dangerous. Women used combinations of herbs, sun exposure, and chemical treatments to achieve lighter hair colors. These practices often damaged hair, creating a cycle where beauty attempts led to hygiene problems that required additional treatments. Dental care was directly connected to beauty standards. White teeth were prized, leading to various whitening practices including rubbing teeth with abrasive substances, rinsing with acidic solutions, and even using urine-based treatments. These practices often damaged tooth enamel, but the social pressure to maintain attractive teeth drove people to continue using them despite negative effects. Body hair removal was practiced by wealthy women, though techniques were primitive and dangerous. Tweezers were used for facial hair, while body hair might be removed with early depilatory creams made from harsh chemicals. These treatments were painful and could cause serious burns, but smooth skin was considered a mark of refinement and cleanliness. Fragrance was essential to medieval beauty standards. Pleasant personal scent indicated both cleanliness and wealth, leading to elaborate perfuming routines. Women created complex scent combinations using available herbs, oils, and imported spices. The ability to maintain pleasant personal fragrance despite limited bathing opportunities required skill, resources, and constant attention. Clothing cleanliness became a beauty statement. Fresh, well-maintained clothing indicated both personal hygiene and economic success. This created pressure to maintain clean clothing even when personal bathing was difficult, leading to interesting priorities where people might have cleaner clothes than bodies. Regional beauty standards created different hygiene pressures. Mediterranean cultures often emphasized different aspects of cleanliness than Northern European societies. These variations meant that hygiene practices that were considered beautiful in one region might be seen as strange or inappropriate in another. Religious influences on beauty standards affected hygiene practices. Some religious traditions emphasized modesty and simplicity, discouraging elaborate hygiene routines as vanity. Others connected cleanliness with godliness, promoting hygiene as spiritual discipline. These religious attitudes could override or reinforce cultural beauty standards depending on local beliefs. Seasonal beauty standards influenced hygiene rhythms. Summer beauty might emphasize different aspects of cleanliness than winter beauty, leading to seasonal variations in hygiene routines. Spring was often associated with renewal and fresh beauty, driving intensive hygiene activities as people prepared their appearance for the active months ahead. Age-related beauty standards affected lifetime hygiene patterns. Young people were expected to maintain higher beauty standards as they sought marriage partners, leading to more intensive hygiene routines during youth. Elderly people might be given more leeway in appearance standards, though wealthy elderly individuals were still expected to maintain their status through continued attention to hygiene and appearance. The technology of medieval cleanliness. Medieval people were surprisingly inventive when it came to hygiene technology. Working within the constraints of available materials and limited understanding of bacteria and disease, they developed ingenious solutions for staying clean that often worked better than you might expect. These technologies ranged from simple tools to complex systems that foreshadowed modern innovations. Combs were among the most sophisticated hygiene technologies of the medieval period. Carved from wood, bone, or horn, they were precision instruments designed for specific purposes. Fine-toothed combs were used for lice removal, while wider space combs managed styling and general hair care. Some combs had different spacing on opposite sides, making them versatile tools for various hair care needs. Razors represented advanced metallurgy applied to hygiene. The folding razor, with its sharp steel blade and protective handle, was a precision instrument that required skilled craftsmanship to produce. The best razors were made by specialized smiths who understood the specific steel properties needed for effective shaving. These tools were often passed down through generations as valuable family possessions. Bath technology was more sophisticated than commonly believed. Wooden tubs were carefully designed with proper drainage and comfortable seating arrangements. Some wealthy households had semi-permanent bathing facilities with heating systems that could warm water efficiently. Monasteries developed complex plumbing systems that provided running water for washing and waste removal. Soap-making technology required understanding of chemistry, even if medieval people didn't think of it in those terms. The process of creating lye from wood ash, combining it with fats in proper proportions, and controlling the chemical reaction to produce effective soap represented sophisticated chemical knowledge passed down through generations of practical experience. Mirror technology improved dramatically during the medieval period. Early mirrors were polished metal surfaces that provided dim, distorted reflections. Later developments included silvered glass mirrors that gave clearer images, though these were extremely expensive luxury items. The quality of available mirrors directly affected the quality of personal grooming possible. Perfume technology involved distillation and extraction techniques that were genuinely advanced. Medieval perfume makers developed methods for extracting essential oils from plants, creating scented waters, and combining fragrances to create complex perfumes. These techniques required specialized equipment and extensive knowledge of plant properties. Textile technology for hygiene included the development of specialized fabrics for undergarments, towels, and cleaning cloths. Linen was prized for undergarments because of its absorbent properties and washability. Different weaves and treatments were developed for different hygiene purposes, showing sophisticated understanding of fabric properties. Water heating technology ranged from simple cauldrons to complex systems. Some medieval bathhouses had sophisticated heating systems that could warm large quantities of water efficiently. These systems often included methods for maintaining water temperature and delivering warm water where it was needed. Waste management technology was surprisingly advanced in some locations. Castle garderobe systems used gravity and water flow to carry waste away from living areas. Some cities developed public sewage systems that managed waste for entire neighborhoods. These systems showed understanding of sanitation principles even without modern disease theory. Storage technology for hygiene items included specialized containers for soaps, oils, and other cleaning supplies. These containers were designed to preserve contents, prevent contamination, and make hygiene items easily accessible. Some storage systems were quite elaborate, with dedicated spaces for different types of hygiene equipment. Regional variations in medieval hygiene. Medieval Europe was not a uniform culture, and hygiene practices varied dramatically from region to region based on climate, available resources, trade connections, and cultural traditions. Understanding these regional differences helps explain why medieval hygiene was so diverse and why generalizations about medieval cleanliness often miss important nuances. Mediterranean regions had access to olive oil, which became central to their hygiene practices. Olive oil was used for soap making, skin moisturizing, and hair care. The warmer climate made frequent bathing more comfortable and practical, leading to hygiene cultures that emphasized regular washing. Access to sea salt provided natural antiseptic properties for wound care and general cleaning. Northern European regions developed hygiene practices suited to colder climates and different resources. Animal fats were more readily available than olive oil, leading to different soap formulations. The cold climate made bathing challenging but also reduced some hygiene problems like excessive sweating. Northern regions often developed more sophisticated indoor heating systems for bathing. Coastal regions had access to sea resources that influenced hygiene practices. Seaweed was used in some areas for soap making and skin treatments. Salt water was used for cleaning when fresh water was scarce. Coastal peoples often developed unique approaches to managing the effects of salt air on skin and hair. Mountain regions faced unique challenges, including limited access to trade goods and harsh weather conditions. Mountain peoples developed specialized techniques for maintaining hygiene with minimal resources. They often became experts at using local plants and minerals for cleaning purposes, developing knowledge that was highly specialized to their specific environments. River valley communities developed hygiene practices centered around their water resources. Access to flowing water made laundry and bathing easier, leading to generally higher hygiene standards. However, these communities also had to deal with waterborne contamination and seasonal flooding that could disrupt hygiene routines. Desert regions developed water conservation techniques that influenced hygiene practices. Dry cleaning methods were more advanced in arid regions, and people became experts at maintaining cleanliness with minimal water use. These regions often developed sophisticated techniques for managing hygiene in extreme heat with limited water resources. Forest regions had access to different plants and resources that shaped their hygiene cultures. Tree-based products like ash for soap making, bark for cleaning tools, and forest herbs for medicinal purposes created unique regional hygiene traditions. Forest peoples often developed extensive knowledge of plant-based hygiene solutions. Urban regions developed different hygiene challenges and solutions compared to rural areas. Cities had access to professional services, imported goods, and specialized facilities, but they also had problems with waste management, overcrowding, and contamination. Urban hygiene often involved different strategies for managing cleanliness in crowded conditions. Trade route regions were influenced by contact with distant cultures and access to exotic hygiene products. These areas often developed cosmopolitan hygiene practices that combined local traditions with imported techniques and materials. Merchant communities often maintained higher hygiene standards due to their need to make good impressions on trading partners. Religious center regions were influenced by the hygiene practices of dominant religious orders. Monastery towns often had higher hygiene standards due to religious emphasis on cleanliness. Pilgrimage destinations developed specialized facilities for managing the hygiene needs of travelers and religious visitors. Border regions often developed hybrid hygiene practices that combine traditions from neighboring cultures. These areas frequently had unique approaches to cleanliness that reflected their position between different cultural influences and their need to accommodate diverse populations. The dark side of medieval hygiene. Not all medieval hygiene practices were harmless folk remedies or quaint historical curiosities. Some were genuinely dangerous, based on misunderstandings about health and disease that could cause serious harm or even death. Understanding these darker aspects of medieval hygiene helps explain why life expectancy was low and why the development of modern medical knowledge was so crucial. Lead-based cosmetics were widely used by wealthy women to achieve pale complexions that were considered beautiful. These preparations, often called cerus, contained white lead that was toxic when absorbed through the skin. Long-term use led to lead poisoning, causing symptoms including hair loss, tooth loss, mental deterioration, and eventually death. The irony was that pursuing beauty through these cosmetics actually caused the physical deterioration they were meant to prevent. Mercury was used in treatments for various hygiene problems, particularly lice and skin conditions. Mercury-based ointments were rubbed into scalps to kill lice, and mercury was sometimes taken internally to treat what were believed to be skin diseases. Mercury poisoning caused severe neurological damage, tooth loss, kidney failure, and death. The saying, "mad as a hatter," comes from mercury poisoning among hat makers who used mercury in their manufacturing process. Bloodletting was often incorporated into hygiene routines as both a cleaning practice and a medical treatment. People believed that removing bad blood would improve both health and appearance. Bloodletting was performed using leeches, cupping, or deliberate cutting. While small amounts of bloodletting might not cause serious harm, excessive bloodletting led to anemia, infection from unsterile tools, and sometimes death from blood loss. Urine was used in various hygiene applications, including teeth whitening and skin treatments. While urine does contain ammonia that has some cleaning properties, using it for hygiene purposes created serious risks of infection and disease transmission. The practice persisted because people noticed some immediate effects without understanding the long-term health risks. Caustic substances were used for hair removal and skin treatments. These early depilatory creams contained lime, arsenic, or other harsh chemicals that could cause severe chemical burns. Women sometimes suffered permanent scarring or disfigurement from these treatments, and some died from poisoning when toxic substances were absorbed through damaged skin. Infected tools and shared facilities spread disease rapidly in communities with poor hygiene standards. Shared razors spread skin infections, blood-borne diseases, and other conditions from person to person. Public bathhouses, while intended to promote cleanliness, often became centers for disease transmission when proper sanitation wasn't maintained. Dental practices caused serious health problems. Attempts to whiten teeth using abrasive substances wore away tooth enamel, leading to increased decay and pain. Tooth extraction without anesthesia or antiseptic procedures often led to serious infections that could spread to other parts of the body and cause death. Contaminated water sources were often used for hygiene purposes, inadvertently spreading waterborne diseases. People might bathe in or drink from water sources that were contaminated with human waste, dead animals, or other pollutants. This created cycles where attempts to stay clean actually increased exposure to dangerous pathogens. Poor understanding of wound care meant that minor injuries from hygiene activities often became serious infections. Small cuts from shaving, scratches from rough cleaning tools, or burns from heated hygiene implements could develop into life-threatening infections when treated with contaminated materials or ineffective remedies. Social pressure to maintain certain hygiene standards sometimes drove people to use dangerous methods rather than accept lower social status. The desire to appear clean and prosperous led people to risk their health with toxic cosmetics, dangerous procedures, or unsanitary practices that promise quick improvements in appearance. Women's hygiene, a different world. Medieval women faced unique hygiene challenges that reflected both biological realities and social expectations. Their hygiene needs were different from men's, their resources were often more limited, and the social consequences of poor hygiene were often more severe. Understanding women's hygiene experiences provides insight into both medieval healthcare and gender dynamics. Menstruation was managed with reusable cloth rags that had to be carefully maintained and discreetly used. These cloths were washed and reused repeatedly, requiring women to plan ahead and maintain supplies of clean materials. The washing of menstrual cloths was often done secretly, as menstruation was considered spiritually contaminating in many medieval cultures. Women developed complex systems for managing their cycles without attracting attention or violating social taboos. Pregnancy and childbirth created additional hygiene challenges that were often life-threatening. Pregnant women were advised to follow specific hygiene routines that were believed to affect the health of their babies, though these recommendations were based on superstition rather than medical knowledge. Childbirth was attended by midwives who had varying levels of knowledge about sanitation and hygiene, leading to high rates of infection and death. Women's clothing created specific hygiene problems and solutions. The layers of undergarments, the difficulty of washing elaborate garments, and the social expectations for maintaining clean appearances meant that women's hygiene routines were often more complex and time-consuming than men's. Women became experts at spot cleaning, using herbs and oils to freshen clothing between full washings. Hair care was particularly important for women, as their hair was often considered their most attractive feature. Unmarried women might display their hair as a sign of beauty and availability, while married women were expected to cover their hair completely in public. This meant that hair care practices varied dramatically based on marital status and social position. Cosmetics were primarily a female concern, leading to the development of various preparations for enhancing appearance. These ranged from relatively harmless plant-based preparations to dangerous chemical treatments. Women became skilled at creating cosmetics from available materials, though they often didn't understand the health risks of some ingredients. Women were often responsible for family hygiene management, making them the household experts on cleaning, soap making, and health maintenance. This gave women specialized knowledge and responsibility, but also additional labor burdens. Women typically managed not only their own hygiene but also that of their children and sometimes their husbands. Social isolation during menstruation was common in many medieval cultures, requiring women to maintain separate hygiene facilities and practices during their cycles. This isolation often meant reduced access to normal hygiene resources and increased difficulty in maintaining cleanliness during a time when hygiene was particularly important. Breast care during nursing required specialized knowledge and practices. Women had to prevent and treat infections, manage milk production, and maintain cleanliness while nursing multiple children over their lifetimes. The lack of understanding about bacteria and infection made nursing-related health problems common and often serious. Women's participation in certain occupations created unique hygiene challenges. Wet nurses had to maintain particularly high hygiene standards, while women working in food preparation faced different cleanliness requirements than those in other trades. These occupational differences meant that women's hygiene practices were often more varied and specialized than men's. The economics of women's hygiene were complicated by their limited independent income and their responsibility for family hygiene management. Women often had to balance their own hygiene needs against those of their families, sometimes sacrificing their own cleanliness to ensure that their children or husbands maintained appropriate appearances. The legacy of medieval hygiene. Medieval hygiene practices didn't disappear with the Renaissance. They evolved, were refined, and in some cases persist to this day. Understanding this continuity helps explain both how far we've come in understanding cleanliness and health, and how some medieval insights were actually quite sophisticated. Many herbal hygiene practices developed during the medieval period formed the basis for modern natural health and beauty products. Herbs like lavender, mint, and rosemary that were used for medieval hygiene are still popular in modern products. The knowledge of plant properties that medieval people developed through trial and error has been validated by modern science and continues to influence contemporary hygiene products. The social connections between hygiene and status that were established in medieval times persist in modern cultures. The idea that cleanliness reflects moral character, social position, and personal worth continues to influence how people think about hygiene. Modern beauty and hygiene industries still capitalize on the social anxieties about cleanliness that were established during the medieval period. Medieval innovations in hygiene technology laid groundwork for later developments. The folding razor evolved into modern safety razors. Medieval soap-making techniques were refined into modern soap production, and medieval bathing practices influenced the development of modern bathroom facilities. Many basic hygiene tools and techniques trace their origins to medieval innovations. Understanding of the relationship between cleanliness and health that developed during the medieval period was a crucial step toward modern medical knowledge. While medieval people didn't understand bacteria or viruses, they observed connections between cleanliness and disease that laid groundwork for later scientific discoveries about sanitation and public health. Regional variations in medieval hygiene practices contributed to the diversity of modern hygiene traditions. Different cultures developed distinct approaches to cleanliness that continue to influence contemporary practices. Understanding these historical variations helps explain why different cultures today have different attitudes toward hygiene and different standards for cleanliness. The medieval emphasis on personal responsibility for hygiene established cultural patterns that persist today. The idea that individuals are responsible for maintaining their own cleanliness and that failure to do so reflects personal failings continues to influence modern attitudes toward hygiene and health. Medieval gender differences in hygiene practices established patterns that continue to influence contemporary expectations. Many of the differences between male and female hygiene routines that exist today can be traced back to medieval practices and social expectations. The economics of medieval hygiene, the idea that better hygiene products cost more money and reflect higher social status, continues to drive modern hygiene and beauty industries. The connection between expensive hygiene products and social prestige that was established in medieval times remains a powerful force in contemporary marketing and consumer behavior. Conclusion: lessons from medieval cleanliness. As we drift off to sleep in our climate-controlled homes, with hot showers available at the turn of a handle and antibacterial soap at our fingertips, it's worth remembering the medieval people who tackled the challenge of staying clean with determination, creativity, and surprisingly sophisticated understanding of what worked and what didn't. They may not have understood bacteria, but they knew that clean people were healthier. They may not have had modern chemistry, but they developed soap recipes that actually worked. They may not have had indoor plumbing, but they created bathing systems that met their needs within their constraints. Medieval hygiene wasn't just about staying clean. It was about maintaining social connections, expressing personal identity, and preserving health in a world full of dangers. It required knowledge, resources, and community cooperation. It was both deeply practical and richly symbolic. Perhaps most importantly, medieval hygiene reminds us that cleanliness is always relative to available resources and cultural expectations. What seemed clean to medieval people might seem dirty to us, just as our standards might seem excessive to them. Understanding this relativity helps us appreciate both how far we've come and how much human ingenuity has always been applied to the basic challenge of staying clean. So the next time you step into a hot shower or squeeze antibacterial soap from a convenient dispenser, remember the medieval people who scrubbed themselves with cold water and harsh soap, who picked lice from each other's hair as an act of love, and who turned the basic human need for cleanliness into a rich culture of care, creativity, and community. Their struggles with hygiene were real. Their solutions were often ingenious, and their commitment to cleanliness despite all the obstacles was remarkable. In our age of convenient cleanliness, there's something both humbling and inspiring about their determination to stay human in a world that made it very, very difficult. And with that thought, perhaps it's time to appreciate your own evening hygiene routine. Settle into your clean sheets and drift off to sleep with gratitude for the simple luxury of being effortlessly clean.